So I was taking a look around at the elections, uh, taking a look at what was going around across the country, how it's supposed to be midterm elections, and the whole entire parading around with especially Georgia and the Stacy Abrams case and stuff like that. I think a lot of the things that's coming to the forefront, whichever party is being, you know, proliferated at this time, whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, they're starting to try to understand why so-called black men is pulling out, why so-called black men is not caring as much as they used to, why has there been a shift in concentration about different issues, especially to the so-called black man. In my honest opinion, when I think about this whole entire situation, in terms of voting, this has been going on since Donald Trump, in which so-called black men started to realize their place in America. Well, they've always understood it, but now it's becoming one of those sort of things like, now I'm going to take action because I feel like such and such party doesn't care for me, or I tried to do the Democratic thing for a long time because I've been taught to be Democratic for a long time and it hasn't got me anywhere. Now, my thing about it is I don't care for either party. You understand? I'm more or less, like I tell people, I'm apolitical. I don't have a side. Even if I am to vote, I'm going to go with someone who has more logical sense in which I believe, regardless if I believe that they're lying or not. Because usually I feel like politicians do lie. But I'm going to go with someone who actually has more of the mission statement that meets my needs as a so-called black man. But I don't even want to dig too deep into this conversation. I want to just go ahead and play a video and give my ideas on it while it plays. So peep, and before I begin, make sure that you like and subscribe. Thank you. So peep.
Read and really appreciated an article that you wrote for the Griot, where you really just go at it and you take issue with a lot of headlines that are saying that it's the black male vote that could cost Democrats, quote unquote, in these midterms, or Stacy Abrams in particular, who's running for governor in the state of Georgia.
And what's funny about it is the Griot that's catered towards the so-called black audience. I think that they are a very biased organization, very biased blog, whatever the hell they're supposed to be. This is the same organization that proliferated the so-called black woman that sat there said the straight black man is an enemy of the so-called black woman. That article that came out, that was actually written by a so-called black man. So the Griot has these different tactics where they come in, where they try to be, on the fence and, be fair and balanced and all that other stuff. But we know they're catering towards so-called black women. We know that. To have a so-called black man come in, to have these conversations, he has to speak in a specific tone that does not aggravate the so-called black woman. Now, a woman like this on your screen, maybe, but more than likely, she doesn't give a damn. She wants to be able to hear that soft-speaking Negro speak the language that she likes. It's funny because brothers found out the other day, one of the girls from that used to was on, I think, MSCNBC or whatever, she just got fired for making a comment about Florida. No, it's funny. It's funny the regulations they're having now in this whole entire paradigm shift of the quote unquote free speech and all this other stuff going on, man.
Kind of unpack that and what you are expressing by way of kind of the irresponsibility is how I took your article of what it is to blame and scapegoat black men for these potential outcomes.
Before I was a writer or a journalist, I was, well, I still am, I guess, an economist. I taught and studied macroeconomics. And so what people don't do is just look at data and facts when they're talking about things that become part of the mainstream narrative.
Exactly. And I must pause that for a second, because even when you talk to certain people and understand the political side of what a lot of these politicians is offering, usually they're not looking at stats. They're not looking at, what is being said what is the actual numbers, what is the actual things that's going on and paying attention. You see it every day. How many countless arguments you see here on YouTube about people who will go on panels and talk about, well, it's this that happened and that happened. But then when you break down the stats, they're all quiet.
Again, black men, a percentage of black men are going to be more conservative, just as that holds true for all men. And
that's a fact. And when they started blaming so-called black men, because I know it was a narrative that's being pushed, like, oh, you know, black men are usually conservative and this, that, and third. It seems as if in this society, men are more conservative than women, because men just have a better understanding on how things are, just more traditional. We don't do this, we don't do that. That's not real. That is not the actual definition of what you claim that thing to be is. So
what people are doing when they talk about this is holding black men to a standard that they don't hold any other constituency of voters. And the reason that is a problem is because of a number of reasons. First of all, you can't dismiss the fact that black men are the Democratic Party's second most reliable constituency, right? Like, only black women are as dedicated and loyal to the Democratic Party as black men as far as voting is concerned. Now, you know, the fact that black people aren't necessarily loyal to the Democratic Party as they are to themselves, because it is our only avenue to make an impact in politics. You could argue that fact, right? Because like black people really don't love the Democratic Party. They love themselves. And like they don't love them any more than a carpenter loves a hammer or a swimmer loves earplugs, right? It is a
well, this is my idea on what he said that. I'm not disagreeing with him when I say this, but you know, the idea that, you know, so-called black people don't actually love the Democratic Party. You know, I think what it is with the Democratic Party is it's a conduit to the quote unquote freedom that so-called black people desire in this country. So the Democratic Party is a way of saying, you know, we can get you from this avenue to this avenue. Keep voting for us and you'll get the change that you so desire, which is all a lie. It's all a lie. We've seen everything that's going up. I mean, I'm not going to even necessarily blame Joe Biden's administration for why all these random things that's going on, such as inflation and all these problems that's going on, and them still giving out federal aid to Ukraine right now versus Russia. You know what I mean? Or I mean, even if you think about it in a much more higher extent, all of this shit was planned, right? Whether it was going to be through Donald Trump being voted again or Joe Biden in his current position, all of this is planned, man. So the thing about it is, to have these political issues and all this other stuff, I mean, yes, I don't think that it comes to black people loving the Democratic Party. They look to the Democratic Party to be a conduit to a lot of their issues that's going on. Which the Democratic Party is nothing more but a damn lie within itself, just like the Republican Party. You know what I mean? It's all about just presentation. It's not actual doing.
Tool for which we can realize our political goals. And so that's one of the main problems. And the second problem is that, like, you can talk about the black male vote and why it's so, you know, it's a little bit below black women's vote, but then you have to also talk about the fact that a lot of black men are 3 times more likely to be disenfranchised because of felony voting laws, right? Or you have to talk about the fact that we know that people who earn less money are less likely to vote, and black men have a wage gap. You have to talk about you have to talk about the education gap. You have to talk about all of that before you can even get to the results of the disparity between black men and black women voting. And then again, you have to acknowledge that, oh yeah, but they're still pretty reliable.
The number of black men who have voted for Trump in both elections is still nominal. We're still talking about less than 20%. It's still a very low number, but it is an uptick of what typical Republicans see.
a controversial thing that no one talks about is that there's a certain percentage of Black men who marry and date and are in relationships with white women. And men are more likely to vote the party or the political ideology of their partner a little bit.
Well, I will say that that is a true statement. I'm not going to disagree with that. But I do feel like when it came to so-called Black men, ever since primarily 2016, it's just been this unchained of the so-called Black man's psyche of feeling like he's not getting anything out of it and that the so-called Black woman is being more proliferated than he is, right? And so when they started witnessing all this other stuff, the Black man sat back and said, yo, I'm tired of being disrespected. I've been in the Democratic race for a long time. Obama did me dirty. The next president that comes in, I don't want to be affiliated with that. We got Hillary Clinton that wants to keep on running and stuff like that, but she has all these investigations that's stemming and these emails that start to come out. Bernie Sanders, that's just trying to be this whole entire good old grandpa who believes in this whole entire liberalist agendas and all these different things, right? And then we have Donald Trump, who says, make America great again, trying to offer more jobs in America, all these different things. And then, much down the line, then Joe Biden and all this other stuff. I mean, I'm just remembering the conversations that went into this. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to necessarily say that the big reason why so-called Black men started voting more Republican is based off the fact of the matter that they started gaining more relationships with so-called white women. I'm not going to really say that because I just even know brothers that still would date so-called Black women or date another nationality of women where they feel like they're being cheated by the Democratic Party, right? So they feel like, there's no point. And so what the Democratic Party is doing is using the pro-wokes in order to entice the so-called Black man saying, come back home. If you come back home, we have some nice vagina waiting for you by the sisters who care about you, Black man. That's how I see things. The white woman ain't gonna love you like how I love you.
More likely to be conservative because, the Republican Party appeals to the kind of misogynoir, the kind of misogyny that is prevalent in America. They appeal to patriarchy. Some men find this appealing because of the little bit of power that they have comes from their maleness and not from their talent or their ability or their smartness. Just because I'm a man and I should be the leader, and that's what Republicans say, and they put a little bit of white supremacy mayonnaise on top of that.
Before I let you,
and this is where the brother true color comes out. This is the problem I have with a good amount of these so-called Black men that start spewing out that pro-woke narrative, not understanding why the so-called Black man who decided to go with the Republican route, what is his reason? You understand? The whole entire pro-woke whole of sitting up there saying, oh, misogyny and misogyny and putting that white supremacy mayonnaise on top and stuff like that, all of that is a goddamn reach. I'm not saying that I'm one that goes for the Republican Party because, like I told you before, I'm apolitical. This is a reason why we should have the conversation between why the so-called Black man feels as if he's not being supported by the Democratic Party and why he sees the Democratic Party as a waste, why he sees the Democratic Party as somewhere that he's been in a rabbit hole for years because he's followed around the so-called Black woman. And so for him to get out of his shell and say, hey, you know what? I feel like I'm being disrespected by the so-called Black community, the Democratic Party, and even seeing what happened, making a mockery over me because you think that I like sex so much that you really think you could appeal to me by having a random gender fluid man in a thought, a whole entire thought champion rapper to tell me if I don't vote, then I'm not going to be able to buck. VUCK, right? And then before that, get your booty to the polls. All of this is a virtue signaling for the so-called Black woman to control the so-called Black man and say, go get your ass out there and vote because you still need to protect me, even politically, so-called Black men. So the brother that's speaking, talking about maleness and all this other stuff, I still feels like he does not understand the psychosis that goes in the so-called black man's mind on why he decides to say, I do not want to vote democratically. And using white supremacy as a way of saying that that brother is a COON.
I do want to just run down a theme that you write about continuously, and that is what happens when people treat Black voters like a monolith.
One of the things that the Democratic Party does is they appeal to those top line issues and forget that Black voters, again, are human beings and people who have economic concerns, who have.
Well, it's the fact of the matter, they like to appeal to so-called Black people emotionally, understanding that the so-called Black woman is the spearhead of the so-called Black community, not the so-called Black man. So the reason why they're able to get off so hard and consider so-called Black people a monolith is because it's being controlled by the so-called Black woman, or the higher uppers or the elite want the so-called Black woman to represent the so-called Black community and not the so-called Black man, because they know the so-called Black man is at the bottom of the totem pole and the so-called Black woman is only above him by a little bit. And then you have all these interceding workings of it where they have, which we'll have a long debate on that. The gender fluid so-called Black man has a little bit of privilege above the so-called, the heterosexual so-called Black man, but it's just a whole entire window for that. That's just a different conversation for a different day, but understand that.
Educational concerns. And when you go to the white places and you talk about, for instance, healthcare, when you talk about educational opportunities, when you talk about the tax burden, and then come to Black places and only talk about criminal justice issues or only talk about racism, what you do is treat and dismiss the real everyday concerns. We have economic concerns too. We are affected by inflation, by global politics, and you should talk to us like you talk to everyone else.
That's a good point, and I definitely do understand where the brother is coming from. But the thing about it is, in understanding this issue, especially after election day, um, pretty much they're starting to get the idea the so-called Black man is tired. The way he's treated, the way he's been represented by these different parties, and they feel as if certain brothers may feel like Republican parties is more progressive. So let me go to a party that's actually going to do something, quote unquote, going to do something, instead of feeling like there's a party that's just going to rain off of my emotions, hear what I have to say and not put anything in place. That's just how I see it. This is just a random rambling. But such as election day is just pretty funny to see the whole entire blame game that was listed on so-called Black men, especially with the issue of Stacy Abrams and the whole entire thing of telling so-called Black men out in Georgia to vote for Stacy Abrams. Trying the whole entire political steez of getting someone like Charlemagne the God and 21 Savage and getting all these so-called Black men who apparently care for the Black community. I mean, it's a reach, man. It's a reach, man. So, I mean, look, listen, at the end of the day, if the issues is going to be ironed out, there has to be more that needs to be done. Not this whole entire thing of talking about how it's this white supremacy, this white supremacy that. I mean, honestly, this day and age, I don't even think the so-called white man that's pulling a plug on the so-called Black man needs to do much, because they're starting to even see the internal fighting that happens between the so-called Black man and the other so-called Black man. The pro-wokes that still want to be behind the so-called Black woman's ass, and the so-called Black man is saying, I'm tired of this shit. I'm ready to go somewhere else, and I'm not feeling like I'm being respected. So then the narrative is saying that you want to go up the so-called white woman's ass, and you care more for the so-called white woman than you care your own people. So it's all these different narratives that's being pushed at the end of the day. But if the people want to have the quote unquote conversation, they need to understand the psychosis of a so-called Black man, which a lot is not willing to do. So give your thoughts in the comment section. And again, before I leave, make sure you like and subscribe. Peace.